So even if the Russians did capture a village, what the Ukrainians would do, because the moment the enemy retreats, you're actually at your weakest point as an attacker when the enemy withdraws from a position, because offensive operations is very chaotic. You've lost communication, you've used ammunition, you don't know, where your wounded are, and you take a position, and if you haven't consolidated that position, you're very vulnerable to a counterattack. And so what would happen is the Ukrainians would pull back, the Russians would come in, then the Ukrainians immediately counterattack, bring in reserves, counterattack, and throw the Russians back out. And then you have to start all over again. And that's the way this war was dragging on.
Kupiansk, a town with a pre-war population of 26,000, sits just 40 kilometers from the Russian border. Positioned along the Osko River, it's not just another town caught in the conflict. Kupiansk is a strategic gateway. It controls major supply lines, including critical road and railway routes that connect the Eastern Front with Kharkiv and Donetsk. Its importance cannot be overstated. Whoever controls Kupiansk controls the flow of troops and supplies in this contested region. Scott Ritter, a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, recently emphasized how Kupiansk is emerging as a crucial flashpoint in the ongoing conflict. He warned that a full-scale confrontation here could determine the future trajectory of the war in eastern Ukraine. His assessment highlights just how high the stakes are for both Russia and Ukraine. In February 2025, tensions in Kupiansk reached a fever pitch. According to a Fox News report on February 5th, Russian forces had intensified their operations around the town, signaling their intention to seize control once again. Their goal is not just to capture Kupiansk, but to use it as a springboard for further operations into Kharkiv and Donetsk. Ukrainian forces, though determined, are spread dangerously thin. With only a few hundred soldiers guarding key positions along the western bank of the Osko River, Ukraine's defense hangs by a thread. Meanwhile, Russia is applying pressure from multiple directions. The question is no longer whether Russia will advance, it's how far they will go and how quickly they can consolidate their gains. This is not just a skirmish for control of a town, it's a battle that could shift the balance of power in the region. Ukrainian forces understand what's at stake, the lines are drawn, and both sides are digging in for what promises to be a decisive confrontation. To truly understand the gravity of this battle, we must analyze the composition of the forces on the ground and their tactical advantages. The Ukrainian defense in Kupiansk is under immense strain. 3 battalions with only a few hundred soldiers hold the line along the Osko River's western bank, while a larger force of approximately 2,000 is stationed inside the town itself. These defenders face a daunting challenge. Scott Ritter, in a recent interview, described the precarious situation facing Ukrainian forces. He warned that without immediate reinforcements, the chances of holding Kupiansk for an extended period are slim. Ukrainian soldiers are brave, but courage alone cannot match the overwhelming firepower and logistical support backing the Russian offensive. On the Russian side, the assault is led by the formidable 1st Guards Tank Army, a battle-hardened unit with a reputation for delivering swift and decisive victories. In recent weeks, this force has been at the forefront of Russian gains in the Kharkiv region. By January 28th, Russian troops had already captured the village of Dorichna, securing a critical foothold for their next move toward Kupiansk. Military analysts from Front Intelligent Inside believe the current troop concentration suggests that a large-scale Russian assault on Kupiansk is imminent. The timing is critical. By reversing Ukraine's December 2024 gains and capturing Novomlinsk, Russian forces have effectively secured their northern approach. With Dorichna under control, they can now focus on expanding their foothold and cutting off Ukrainian supply lines. The strategic implications of this operation are clear. If Russian forces manage to encircle Kupiansk, they will open the door for further advances into Kharkiv and potentially deeper into northern Ukraine. For Ukrainian defenders, every day they hold out is a victory in itself, but the odds are stacked heavily against them. The pressure is relentless. Scott Ritter's analysis aligns with that of several military experts who see the unfolding events in Kupiansk as part of a broader Russian strategy aimed at encircling and isolating key Ukrainian positions. This strategy, if successful, would leave the Ukrainian army dangerously exposed. The question now is, how did the situation reach such a critical point? To answer that, we must break down the tactical moves that have shaped the battle so far. To capture Kupiansk, Russian forces must first secure and expand their foothold across the Osko River, a crucial natural barrier that separates them from full control of the town. In late January, Russian troops pushed across the river, capturing the village of Dorichna. This foothold gave them a launching point to establish control over nearby areas, paving the way for a broader offensive. The construction of pontoon bridges has been essential for ensuring the steady movement of reinforcements and supplies across the river. Despite Ukrainian efforts to disrupt these operations, Russian engineering units have proven remarkably efficient at building and securing these temporary crossings. Each day, more Russian forces pour across the river, reinforcing their positions and solidifying their hold on strategic points. Military analysts describe this phase of the operation as a textbook example of how to establish a logistical network under combat conditions. Once the bridgehead is stable, Russian units can launch a coordinated assault on the town itself, aiming to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses in a matter of days. Scott Ritter has noted that the speed and efficiency of the Russian buildup are reminiscent of similar operations earlier in the war, where rapid movements led to decisive victories. He warns that Ukrainian forces are in a race against time to prevent this bridgehead from expanding into a full-scale attack corridor. On the Ukrainian side, the situation is increasingly desperate. With limited resources and constant pressure from artillery strikes, their ability to hold the line is being tested to the extreme. Defensive lines that once seemed strong have begun to buckle under relentless assaults. Without reinforcements, Ukrainian commanders are forced to make difficult decisions, either hold their current positions at all costs or withdraw to more defensible ground. However, retreating risks losing critical supply lines and giving Russian forces an uncontested path to the town's heart. The stakes are high and every moment counts. For now, the defense holds, but the question is, for how much longer? This tactical maneuver is just one piece of a much larger strategy aimed at reshaping the Eastern Front entirely. Let's take a closer look at the strategic implications beyond Kupiansk. The battle for Kupiansk is not an isolated event. It's part of a broader Russian strategy to consolidate control over northeastern Ukraine and push further into key regions. The retired Ukrainian Colonel Osterikov has pointed out that recent Russian gains in the Kharkiv region suggest a deliberate plan to encircle Kupiansk and cut it off from the rest of Ukraine's defensive network. There are two possible routes for the next phase of the Russian advance. One option is to move south towards Izium, a vital logistical hub that, if captured, would leave the entire region vulnerable. The other option is to encircle Kupiansk itself, isolating the defenders and forcing a surrender without a costly urban battle. Scott Ritter believes the second option is more likely, given Russia's focus on minimizing losses while maximizing strategic gains. Encirclement has proven highly effective in recent operations, and Kupiansk could become the latest example of this tactic in action. If Russian forces manage to cut off supply lines to Kupiansk, Ukrainian defenders will be left in an increasingly precarious position. Fire control over key roads and railways will allow Russian artillery to dominate the battlefield, turning Kupiansk into a de facto fortress under siege. Colonel Starikov emphasizes that even if Russian forces choose not to storm the town directly, they can simply tighten their grip, cutting off all avenues of escape and resupply. This strategy would eventually force a Ukrainian withdrawal or risk the destruction of their remaining forces in the area. The loss of Kupiansk would have a cascading effect on Ukraine's defensive posture in the region. Not only would it open the door for a potential push towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, but it would also weaken Ukraine's ability to launch counteroffensives in the north. As the battle for Kupiansk continues to unfold, it becomes clear that the outcome here could reshape the course of the entire conflict in eastern Ukraine. The battle for Kupiansk is not just about a small town in eastern Ukraine. It reflects a far larger and more complex conflict that has been brewing for years. Over the past 12 months, Russian forces have steadily advanced, recovering territory they lost earlier in the war. This advance has not been a blitzkrieg-style operation with rapid breakthroughs, but a grinding, deliberate campaign, a war of attrition designed to wear down Ukrainian forces. This kind of conflict is slow and unforgiving. It tests not only the strength of armies, but also their stamina, logistics, and morale. Every kilometer of ground is contested and paid for in blood, with losses on both sides mounting. Unlike earlier phases of the war, where lightning-quick advances defined the front lines, we now see a brutal struggle to hold even the smallest villages. Each day, artillery barrages, drone strikes, and infantry assaults push soldiers on both sides to their limits. Scott Ritter, in his detailed analysis, compares this phase of the conflict to wars of the 20th century, where sustained pressure and superior logistics often determined the outcome. According to Ritter, Russia's strategic patience combined with its willingness to absorb losses gives it a significant edge in a prolonged war of attrition. In his words, this is a logistics war where the side that can maintain its supply lines and sustain its forces the longest will ultimately prevail. Ukrainian forces have demonstrated remarkable adaptability on the battlefield. They have learned to combine traditional tactics with modern technology, using drones for reconnaissance and precision strikes. In some areas, well-planned ambushes have inflicted heavy losses on Russian units. The deployment of mines, combined with drone-guided artillery, has become a powerful tool for slowing down Russian advances. However, these tactics come with limitations. While ambushes can be devastating, they require significant planning and coordination. Moreover, the success of these operations often depends on accurate intelligence and reliable communication, both of which are becoming increasingly difficult as Ukrainian supply lines are stretched thin. Every ambush is a high-risk gamble, and victories are often measured in meters, not kilometers. Each small success is paid for with exhaustion and loss. Ukrainian soldiers have become experts in defensive warfare, but holding their positions for months on end has taken a toll. Units that were once well-trained and well-equipped are now struggling to replace lost personnel and maintain their equipment. As one Ukrainian officer put it, we can hold for now, but every day it gets harder. The role of Western military aid. The continuous flow of Western military aid has been a critical factor in keeping Ukraine's war effort alive. Advanced weapon systems such as long-range artillery and precision-guided rockets have given Ukrainian forces an edge in certain battles, but there are growing concerns about sustainability. These weapons require extensive training and maintenance, both of which are difficult to provide in frontline conditions. Ammunition shortages are becoming more frequent, forcing Ukrainian commanders to ration their firepower. Every artillery shell and guided missile must be carefully allocated. Meanwhile, the flow of spare parts and replacement equipment is often delayed, leaving frontline units struggling to maintain their combat effectiveness. These logistical challenges could become a decisive factor if the conflict continues at its current intensity. Russia's adaptation and strategy shift. Russian forces, by contrast, appear to have adapted to the realities of prolonged conflict. Early in the war, Russia relied on large-scale frontal assaults, which often resulted in significant losses. Over time, however, their strategy has evolved. They have shifted to smaller, more focused operations aimed at steadily wearing down Ukrainian defenses. Instead of launching massive attacks, Russian units now focus on capturing strategic positions one by one. By combining artillery barrages with infantry advances, they force Ukrainian defenders to retreat or risk encirclement. This method may be slower, but it is far less costly in terms of manpower and equipment. Scott Ritter has pointed out that this strategy reflects Russia's long-term approach to the conflict. In his view, Russia is playing a waiting game, allowing Ukraine to exhaust its resources while preserving its own strength for decisive moments. According to Ritter, time is on Russia's side in this war of attrition. The psychological toll of this war cannot be ignored. Prolonged conflict wears down even the most experienced soldiers. Fatigue, loss, and uncertainty about the future weigh heavily on the minds of those fighting on the front lines. Reports of declining morale among Ukrainian troops are becoming more common. Commanders are struggling to keep their units cohesive and motivated in the face of relentless pressure. At the same time, Russian forces, bolstered by a steady stream of reinforcements, seem increasingly confident. Their ability to rotate fresh troops into critical positions gives them a clear advantage. While individual battles may still be hard-fought, the overall momentum appears to be shifting in their favor. This brings us to a crucial question: what happens next? As the battle for Kupiansk continues to unfold, its implications for the broader war are becoming increasingly clear. Kupiansk is no longer just a small town on the map, it's a symbol of the larger struggle in Ukraine. Both sides understand its importance, and the coming weeks will determine its fate. For Russia, capturing Kupiansk would be a major strategic victory, giving them control over a vital supply corridor and opening the door for further advances into Kharkiv and beyond. Scott Ritter has repeatedly highlighted the importance of this moment. He describes Kupiansk as a test of will and strategy where long-term planning will decide the outcome. The battle is not just about who can take the town, but about who can endure the longest in this grinding war of attrition. For Ukraine, the fight for Kupiansk is a test of resilience. Every day the defenders hold out is a victory in its own right. But the cost is mounting. Supplies are dwindling, reinforcements are scarce, and the pressure is relentless. The question is not just how long they can hold, but whether they can regroup and turn the tide. The battle for Kupiansk is far from over, but one thing is clear: its outcome will have far-reaching consequences for the future of this war. The world watches, waiting to see what comes next.